All right, so this is going to be a quick little video to help catch you up on what you missed in class, which we started factoring trinomials. So before we get started, okay, before we can talk about factoring, we need to remember how to do the opposite of factoring, which is to multiply. So what we did in the beginning of class is we just worked on a couple like multiplication problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these on here, and I'm really going to kind of give you the choice. If you want to work through these with me, okay, then you can feel free. Or what I suggest is if you're looking at these and you're like, I know how to multiply this, then I suggest that maybe you hit the pause key, multiply it out, and then you can just kind of fast forward along and you can see if you did it right. But if you want, go ahead and multiply these with me. And so we're going to start with x times x and get x squared, right? So what we're doing is this double distributing idea. Sometimes a lot of teachers call it FOIL. And then we're going to add 7x and then take 7 times negative 5 and get minus 35. So what happens here is we're going to combine like terms right here and get x squared plus 2x minus 35. All right, so hopefully that rings a bell right there. Now, the next one we're going to do is we've got this 3 out in front. So there's a couple different ways to go about it, but I like to distribute that 3 first. And now we have the quantity 12x plus 3, and we're multiplying that by the quantity 5x minus 2. So again, I'm going to double distribute, and 12x times 5x is 60x squared. We get 12 times negative 2 is minus 24x. And then 3 times 5x is plus 15x. And finally, our last constant term is negative 6. So again, what we see is these two middle terms can combine like terms. And a negative 24 and a 15 is going to make negative 9x minus 6. And so these are the two answers right here, okay? Is this trinomial, and we have this trinomial right here. So that actually leads us into what we're going to do today. Is we are going to start with the trinomial, and we're going to go backwards and figure out how to break it into those two parentheses. And that's what factoring is, okay? So the first example we did in class today was, let's see here, x squared plus 7x plus 10. And our goal is to factor this. Now, what I want to do before I get started is I want to come back up. I'm going to get all of this out of the way just so that you can pay attention to what I'm looking at right here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to this first review problem that I did. And I want you to look again at when we multiplied this. Do you remember teachers ever talking about FOIL? Okay? So what happens when we FOIL is this first term right here is the F. It's what happens when you multiply the first. And this term right here is what we'd call the O. It's what happens when you multiply the two outside terms. And then this would be the I. It's what happens when you multiply the two inside terms. And then finally, the last is what happens, the L, when you multiply the last terms. And so when you write your final answer, the first term is the x squared. The outer and the inner combine like terms to make 2x, and the negative 35 is the last term. So let's try to use this now when we're breaking this apart in factoring. So first off, I'm going to split this into two parentheses because that's how you get a trinomial, is by double distributing two parentheses. We're going to start with the first term and we're going to split it into x times x. And that's what's going to give us the x squared. And then what we're going to do is we're going to split the last term, which is the L in FOIL. Now, there's a couple different ways to split this into factors. We could use 10 and 1, okay? Or we could use 5 and 2. Both of these multiply to make 10. Now remember, the outer and the inner need to add or subtract to make 7. So which factors should we use? I agree. I think we should use these ones right here. So what I'm going to do is put in 5 and 2. And now the last thing we're going to do is figure out what the signs need to be. And so when we multiply the outer term, there's a 2x. When you multiply the inner terms, there's a 5x. And what I kind of then do is say, okay, how does a 5x and a 2x add to make a 7x? Well, if it's positive 5, positive 2, then it'll add to make 7x, okay? And so what our final answer would be is the factors x plus 5 and x plus 2. And so that's what we're kind of looking at doing, is splitting things into factors, but doing it algebraically, which means we're going to have x's. So the next one that we looked at in class was something like n squared minus 6n plus 8. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and split this into our two factors. And when we start, we're going to take the first term right here and we're going to split it into n times n. And then we're going to take the last term and we're going to split it into factors of 8. So, all right, what are factors of 8? Well, 1 times 8 makes 8, and 4 times 2 makes 8. So the question is now, what can we add and subtract when we combine the outer and the inner to make a 6? And we're going to use the 4 and the 2. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 4 and 2 in here. Now, the very last thing, if you're starting to notice, the very last thing I do is I figure out the signs, okay? So again, the outer term is 2n, the inner term is 4n, and I kind of ask myself, how does a 4n and a 2n make a negative 6n? Well, I'm going to go over another thing here that we talked about in class. And what that is this idea that if this middle term right here is a negative, do you see that where I'm putting the green right here? Maybe I'll highlight this right here, okay? If this term right here is a negative, then you already know number sense tells you that if this middle term is a negative, the bigger of the two terms needs to also be the negative. That's how it works when you add and subtract. If the bigger number is positive, the answer is positive. If the bigger number is negative, then the answer is negative. So the bigger term will always have the same sign as that middle. Well, if we have a negative 4n and we minus 2, that will give us the negative 6, okay? So it's going to be minus and minus. But if you also notice, negative 4 times negative 2 makes positive 8. And so our final answer are the factors n minus 4 and n minus 2. Okay? So again, that's kind of the idea of this, right? Is we're taking multiplication and going backwards and breaking it into pieces. So the last one that we did in class, okay, is now let's combine both of the factoring methods that we have talked about so far. So what I need to get you in the habit of doing is when you first look at a problem, we need to almost ask ourselves every single time, is there a GCF? Is there a greatest common factor? Well, they don't all have a Y, but I do notice that 2, 4, and 30 are all divisible by 2. So that means that 2 is the greatest common factor and we can factor it out. So the first thing that I'm going to do is factor out a GCF. And when we factor out a 2, basically what's going to happen is all of the terms are going to divide by 2. So 4y will divide to make 2y, and negative 30 is going to divide to make negative 15. And so essentially, like I said, we just basically took all the numbers and divided out by 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the resulting trinomial and we're going to split that into the two parentheses. So the 2 is going to stay out front. That's your greatest common factor. And we're going to split this trinomial. Again, we take our first term and we split it into y and y. And we take our last term, 15, and split it into its factors. Well, what multiplies to make 15? Well, obviously 15 and 1, but also 5 and 3. And so which factors is not only going to multiply to make 15, but add or subtract to make 2, and we're going to choose to use the 5 and the 3, okay? So as I've kind of been doing on the previous examples, now if you notice, the very last thing I do is I figure out what the signs are. The outer is going to be the 3y and the inner is the 5y. And that is what is combined to make the 2y in the middle. All right, let's talk about that rule we just said. If this middle term is a positive, you know right away which term needs to be the positive, and that's the bigger one. So to make that middle term be a positive, it's the 5, it's the 5y right here that needs to have that same sign. Let me go ahead and highlight this in yellow so you can see. The middle sign will always be the sign of the bigger term. So then my common sense, my number sense says, if we have a positive 5y and take away 3, that will give us a positive 2. So we're going to make this plus 5, take away 3. And then I always just kind of double check, does a positive 5 and a negative 3 equal negative 15? Yes. So the final answer is 2, y plus 5, y minus 3. All right, so that's what we did in class. Hopefully that helps you get started. The homework is going to be on the outline. You can go ahead and print it off or work on the problems on a separate sheet of paper, and hopefully you'll come to class next time knowing what you missed.